Let's see. US-NATO's war on the Russian people. Revolutionary Socialist Review for March 5th, 2022. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review. This is your co-host, Chris Driscoll. Along with me is our other co-host, Rainer Shea. Rainer, how you doing?
Oh, I'm trying something new. I'm on campus right now, and it's a little bit later, so I'll see if I have to go to another part of this activity center. This is an experiment, but as long as you guys can hear me, it seems like it'll work out.
Yeah, we hear you just fine. Your voice is a little deeper, kind of like one of those movie announcers, kind of deep. But other than that, we hear you just fine. We understand you. So you're on campus, obviously in the Russian fights the Nazis section of campus there. Okay, for tonight, starting off, topic number one, the destabilizing Russia is the U.S. empire's only hope for regaining what it's just lost. Rainer Shea.
On one hand, Putin's invasion has provided unity to NATO and the EU, which was lacking prior to this, and that's troubling, which means Putin has unintentionally offset some of the potential for inter-imperialist rivalry. But Putin has taken a gamble. He's taken this gamble. He's taken on this cost because he sees that by acting in this assertive way, he is chipping away at a huge part of U.S. unipolar hegemony. He's calling the bluff of the EU, NATO, and the U.S. empire. He's exposing them for the cowards they are, and he's liberating the people who are oppressed by the Kiev regime to the effect of further discrediting U.S. imperialism. This is added on top of the Afghanistan withdrawal last year. And the U.S. can only compensate for this potentially by destabilizing Russia through sanctions. But apparently when they impose sanctions, there's a rally around the flag effect within that country because the people realize that the cause of their problems is the U.S. empire, not their own government. So maybe they'll end up increasing Putin's popularity. If so, that would be a reverse effect, kind of the equivalent effect of what Putin did with his retaliation against the U.S. empire, which ended up unifying the imperialist bloc. Maybe the imperialist bloc will end up unifying Russians behind Putin more with their retaliation against Putin in the form of these sanctions. So there's two sides to this whole issue. There's things gained and things lost on both sides.
I see. Okay, that's a very interesting take. You say Russia is liberating Ukrainians. In that sense, I'd say that this is more of a liberation than an invasion. I don't really see it as a liberation. I see it as a rescue mission, a rescue operation. It's a policing action, obviously. It's a three-pronged policing action. Number one prong was to safeguard and protect and liberate, if you will, the Russian-speaking more than 1/3 of Ukraine, who were under constant assassination, bombardment, shelling, and other forms of Nazi fascist criminality, which comes down to one word that I use, is genocide. The Nazi fascists in Ukraine were genociding the Russian-speaking third of Ukraine. This you can look at this, the losses and so forth, and the gains, and what Putin has gained and lost out of this. Just in poll numbers, Putin shot up from 61% popularity, or 61% job approval rating, to 69%, which is pretty damn good. It's a hell of a lot better than pedophile Joe Biden's 41% approval rating. But it's not a real strong measure to beat Biden. Most national heads around the world beat Biden, so that's not really saying much. I mean, Biden is so incredibly poor in every possible way that it's not a big deal to beat him. As far as the sanctions go, I think Putin really doesn't care about the sanctions. There will be some short-term pain by the Russian economy, or for the Russian economy, through these sanctions, but the long-term gain for the Russians is to substitute and replace. They substitute and replace Russian and third world and Chinese sources for European sources. Basically, they never did buy much from America. So, obviously, to me, Russia gains a hell of a lot out of that. Did the sanctions themselves have some impact on the Russian people? I don't really think so. I think Putin's gain in popularity comes mainly from Putin actually getting up off his lazy ass after 8 long years of genocide against the Russian-speaking and ethnic Russian people of Ukraine, and actually doing something about it. Putin himself, in his speech last Tuesday, said, this is long overdue. Those were his words, long overdue. And I agree with Vladimir Putin. It's long overdue, Vladimir Putin. You should have done this 8 fucking years ago. But that's water under the bridge. So that's the reason the Russian people are applauding Putin now, is because he finally got up off his lazy ass and did something. Now, I'm not saying that, because he's lazy that he doesn't do anything right. Putin is a master thinker, a master planner. And when he does something, he does it very, very well. He has put America to shame numerous times during the 2 times that he was president of Russia. And this most recent time, which he's been president for whatever it is, like 6 years now, 8 years, whatever it is. He's done a pretty damn good job of putting America to shame, putting America in the losers category over and over and over again. So bravo to Putin for that. The people of Russia, here's the crucial figure: 9 out of 10 Russians believe, and have believed for the last 8 years, that Russia should move in a rescue operation and liberate and safeguard the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, and not just the Russian-speaking people, because there are non-Russian-speaking people who are also decent human beings, who are not Nazis, who are not fascists. However, the government over the last 8 years has been fascist, with numerous Nazi sections as well. So not just fascist, but the specific kind of fascism, Nazism, in specific areas of the government. But the entire government has been under control of some form of fascism for the last 8 years, and that includes Volodymyr Zelensky. Even though people will shout, but Zelensky is Jewish. Well, you know what? There are Jewish fascists. Menachem Begin, a prime minister of Israel for many years, was a Jewish fascist who started out his career running a fascist militia, a fascist terrorist gang that blew up what was it called? The St. David Hotel, I think it was called, in Jerusalem. Jews can be fascist, and many Jews over the years have been fascists. And Volodymyr Zelensky, in Russian you would call him Vladimir, but he's not Russian, so he's a fascist, and he's been running a fascist government that has been using its military to crush Russian-speaking and ethnic Russian people, to murder them in such high quantities that it must be called genocide. So, okay, next on the list, US-instigated conflict threatens humanity. And this is an editorial by the Workers' World Party in Workers' World, which is the newspaper of the Workers' World Party. Over $1 trillion in NATO arms and facilities have been thrust into Eastern European border nations next to Russia. For 8 years, since the US-backed coup in Kiev, Washington has supported the neo-fascist-backed regime in Ukraine with billions of dollars in weapons and other resources, while the Ukrainian regime's military relentlessly shelled the People's Republics of Lugansk and Donetsk, killing thousands of people in Russian-speaking Donbass region. US imperialism has now succeeded in drawing Russian President Vladimir Putin into committing its troops into defending Russian interests by sending troops into Ukraine. One could say that US strategists, war planners, corporate media, and politicians have created a situation where the people of Ukraine are put in harm's way to serve the interests of the Pentagon-armed corporate warmongers. One not only could say that, but it's true. Contrary to media claims, Ukraine's sovereignty is not the main issue. These forces were not placed there over the last quarter century to protect Ukraine. The US and European imperialists have a larger goal in mind. Powerful interests in the corporate world, the ones who US presidents bow down to, have spent decades maneuvering NATO troops into strategic positions where they now pose an immediate threat to Russia, a nation of vast natural resources. Corporate leaders have been frustrated since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 that the dissolution of the world's first workers' state did not open up the world's largest country, Russia, to their exploitation. Wall Street CEOs are salivating at the thought of acquiring the profits possible from exploiting Russia's large quantities of oil, natural gas, cobalt, chrome, copper, gold, lead, magnesium, nickel, platinum, tungsten, vanadium, and zinc, as well as profits from crops and livestock production and timber from the world's largest forest reserves. At a time of dire capitalist economic crisis, Russia's resources beckon to the imperialists as the solution to their problems. They've created a massive propaganda campaign preparing the US and indeed much of the world's working class to back up their goal of replacing President Putin's government with a puppet government subservient to global imperialist interests. The risks extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. Both Russia and the US have nuclear weapons that can destroy the world. It must be noted that the US is the only country in history that has dropped nuclear bombs on another country, on Japan, in 1945. They've threatened to use nuclear weapons against Vietnam, North Korea, and other nations since then. The possibility of the current US-instigated conflict with Russia in Ukraine escalating into a nuclear war is a fearful scenario. It puts all the world's people in harm's way. Capitalist leaders think Russia's vast wealth makes it worth the risk. Those of us on the other side of humanity, workers, environmentalists, youth, oppressed nations, all gender identities, the vast majority of the world's population have an urgent responsibility to put an immediate halt to their mad, profit-driven war that can destroy the world. You have anything to say?
Oh, I was talking, but I muted it because there's these damn TVs over there.
Oh.
Since the end of the Soviet Union, there has been a continuation of the orthodoxy that Russia is an enemy, and the neocons normalized this, you could say, new type of Russophobia right in tandem with the rise of Putin, which meant the rise of a post-socialist Russia that was still defying U.S. interests. That's what this entire Russophobic campaign has been about. It's not been about anti-authoritarianism. It's not been about democracy. It's certainly not been about protecting the autonomy of peoples. It's been about the U.S. capitalist class wishing it could be more powerful than the Russian capitalist class when it comes to the resources that exist within Russia. And there are those who point to this and claim that this is an inter-imperialist conflict, but they haven't looked at the socioeconomic analysis of modern Russia, which shows that it doesn't have the capacity to act as an imperialist power. It's not that strong in its capital. This is purely a humanitarian intervention. Russia is not going to start going in and exploiting Ukraine's resources.
Yes, well put, well put. Okay, next on the list, Putin, crazy like a fox. I'm sorry, I fucked that up. Putin, crazy like a fox. And this article is by Scott Ritter, Consortium News. Scott Ritter is an interesting fella. He was a U.S. Marine, deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then he became a UN weapons inspector and worked at that for a long time. He's got a pretty good look at things. Anyway, he says US-instigated conflict threatens humanity. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. But that's not what he said. He says, well, it says Putin crazy like a fox. That's what he said. So anyway, I'll just go ahead and read you some highlights from this. As the Russian invasion of Ukraine goes on, the world wonders what the reason was behind such a precipitous act. The pro-Ukraine crowd has put forth a narrative constructed around the self-supporting themes of irrationality on the part of the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and his post-war fantasies of resurrecting the former Soviet Union. This narrative ignores that, far from acting on a whim, the Russian president is working from a playbook that he initiated as far back as 2007, when he addressed the Munich Security Conference and warned the assembled leadership of Europe of the need for a new security framework to replace existing unitary system currently in place, built as it was around a transatlantic alliance led by the United States. Moreover, far from seeking the reconstitution of the former Soviet Union, Putin is simply pursuing a post-Cold War system that protects the interests and security of the Russian people, including those who, through no fault of their own, found themselves residing outside the borders of Russia following the collapse of the Soviet Union. In this age of politicized narrative shaping, which conforms to the demands of domestic political imperatives as opposed to geopolitical reality, fact-based logic is not in vogue. For decades now, the Russian leadership has been confronting a difficult phenomenon where Western democracies, struggling to deal with the serious fractures derived from their own internal weaknesses, produce political leadership lacking in continuity of focus and purpose in foreign and national security relations. Whereas Russia has had the luxury of having consistent leadership for the past 2 decades and can look at another decade or more of the same Western leadership in a transient, the same Western leadership is transient in nature. One need only reflect on the fact that Putin has, in his time in office, dealt with 5 US presidents who, because of their alternating nature of their political parties occupying the White House, have produced policies of an inconsistent and contradictory nature. Rather than try to explain to the American people the historical roots of Putin's concerns with an expanding NATO membership or the impracticalities associated with any theoretical reconstruction of the former Soviet Union, The US political elite instead define Putin as an autocratic dictator. He is not, possessing grandiose dreams of a Russian-led global empire. No such dreams exist. It is impossible to reason with a political counterpart whose policy formulations need to conform with the ignorance-based narratives. Russia, confronted with the reality that neither the US nor NATO are willing to engage in a responsible discussion about the need for a European security framework which transcended the inherent instability of an expansive NATO seeking to encroach directly on Russian borders, took measures to change the framework in which such discussions would take place. Russia had been seeking to create a natural buffer between it and NATO through agreements which would preclude NATO membership for Ukraine and distance NATO combat power from its borders by insisting the alliance's military technical capabilities be withdrawn behind NATO's boundaries as they existed in 1997. The US and NATO rejected the very premise of such a dialogue. The Russian invasion of Ukraine must be evaluated within this context. By invading Ukraine, Russia is creating a new geopolitical reality which revolves around the creation of a buffer of allied Slavic states, Belarus and Ukraine, that abuts NATO in a manner like the Cold War era frontier presented by the border separating East and West Germany. Here's the punchline. The likelihood that Europe balks at a resumption of the Cold War is high. And when it does, Russia will be able to exchange the withdrawal of its forces from Belarus and Ukraine in return for its demands regarding NATO's return to the 1997 boundaries. Vladimir Putin may, in fact, be crazy like a fox. You're muted again? Oh,
I've had to be muted because there's so much going on here, even though this room is empty.
Yeah.
There's so much to say about that. There's this perception that Putin is the new czar, that he's trying to bring back the Russian Empire. And when it comes to these kinds of demonizing narratives, it can be so easy to accept that when it comes to Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, these visions that they conjure up of Washington's adversaries having these grand sinister designs and acting in ways that mirror US imperialism and colonialism. They're doing this all over the place, and it's BS every time. And I've seen it echoed even by many leftists and communists who take these sectarian stances that lead them to ahistorical conclusions. When it comes to Putin, you can oppose Putin's bourgeois regime while not buying into the narrative that this is all about supposed new Russian imperialism. New Russian imperialism does not exist. We'll see if that's true in the next century, like 100 years from now. But it's more likely that by then Russia will have become socialist again.
By then, hopefully, the whole world will have been. Okay, next on the list, I'm going to step away for a few minutes, but you can go ahead and go through this, and I'll be back before you finish. Anti-Chinese narratives threaten to bring back Cold War evils. Rainer Shea.
There was a horrific dynamic that emerged throughout the Cold War, where the people of the global South were treated as expendables within this conflict that Washington was waging. And when you look at the casualties within this conflict, they were overwhelmingly, pretty much all, on the side of the U.S. It was the U.S. that installed all of these dictatorships, military regimes that collectively murdered millions of people in Indonesia, Latin America. It was the U.S. that carried out these CIA ops, which murdered all of these people in Asia and Africa, Latin America, so forth. And it's now U.S. policy that's sacrificing the lives of all of these people in the same regions in order to further Washington's Cold War maneuvers against Russia and China, primarily China, because the purpose of Washington's destabilization efforts in Africa, which have produced the Ethiopia famine, is to sabotage the expansion of China's Belt and Road Initiative into Ethiopia, as is the case for Washington's brutal sanctions against Afghanistan, which are placing the lives of so many people there in danger, all for the sake of sabotaging the BRI within Afghanistan. And it goes on and on. Myanmar, the rest of the Horn of Africa, increasingly parts of Latin America. Washington is increasingly sowing instability and chaos and violence, civil unrest, civil war, proxy wars, so that it can gain some sort of upper hand against China, which will probably be ultimately a futile effort. And it's coming at the cost of the same kinds of humanitarian catastrophes that we saw during the last Cold War.
Okay. Next on the list, EU bans broadcast by RT Sputnik. And this article comes to us from Sputnik. Let me see if I can find it here first. Okay, the ban comes as Russia Sigadnaya, let me get that straight. Russia Sigadna Media Group, which includes the Sputnik News Agency, said that Google News and Google Discover have restricted access to the group's resources online, calling the move a case of censorship. This followed Sputnik and RT-related apps reportedly being banned by Google from the Play App Store across Europe shortly after the company stated that they are blocking YouTube channels connected to RT and Sputnik across Europe, effective immediately. Wednesday's developments were preceded by Instagram and Meta, formerly known as Facebook, restricted access to Sputnik and RT across the EU. There you have it.
There's such a wave of censorship right now, isn't there? And it goes beyond the corporate level, because you have all of these outrageous stories of especially Eastern European countries putting people in prison for years for publicly voicing support for Russia in this conflict. And that's the direction, it seems, that so-called Western democracy is going in, a direction where free speech is increasingly non-existent, and where actual journalism is not able to thrive. The places where journalism can still have a presence, like actual journalism that tells the truth about this conflict, a place where that can thrive is in the networks that we create within our communities, within our domains that we carve out among the members of our movements. That's why it's so important to organize, so important to connect with the masses in our communities, because increasingly we're going to be cut off from the online communities we've built. And we're going to need to get serious in organizing for revolution so that ultimately we can take control over the communication tools that exist already.
Exactly. And in the meantime, we need to keep up that alternative media. Although it's a tiny voice trying to break through loudspeakers on every side that are owned by the capitalist class, we still have to do it. Okay, next on the list, EU cuts off 7 major Russian banks from SWIFT. And this comes from RT, the television network. The Russian Union, excuse me. Let me start that over. The European Union has disconnected Russian banks subject to sanctions from the SWIFT global payment network. 7 major lenders in the country have been targeted, including VTB, Roisia, Otkreite, Novacom Bank, Promsvise Bank, Sovcom Bank, VEBRF, Russia's largest bank. Sberbank is not on the list for now. The news was announced in the EU's official journal on Wednesday. All these banks that we have listed under SWIFT are all included based on their connection to state and the implicit connection to the war effort. We have not gone for a blanket ban across the whole banking system, the officials said. Neither Sberbank nor Gazprom Bank have so far been targeted, as they are the main channels for payments for Russian gas and oil, which have not yet faced EU penalties. The two will be subject to other sanctions, however, the officials stated.
So Washington is trying to economically isolate Russia, and I've been investigating exactly what this means for the Russian people, because on the one hand, Russia and China are allies, and China is one of the biggest producers of goods, but on the other, it's U.S. companies that are making these goods. So the U.S. capitalist class, have great leverage towards depriving the Russian people of the resources that let them function in the modern world. And we're seeing this with how the Western countries are cutting off access to communications tools, to these online facets. And it goes to show just how much imperialist influence the world still needs to shake off. And I think that my optimistic takeaway from this is that China has been building an alternative internet system, which our media demonizes as authoritarian, totalitarian, great firewall, repressive, but it's the only alternative to this tyrannical system that dominates the globe, and it centers from the United States.
Yeah, well, there are a number of U.S. manufacturers that operate in China. Those are far, far, far from the only manufacturers that operate in China. First of all, several other countries own manufacturing outfits that operate in China. Japan is tremendous as an example. However, China basically controls the manufacturing of something on the order of between 70 and 80% of everything that's manufactured in China. So there are some crucial areas where American companies can cut off Russia. I think in most cases, Russia has alternatives and is just turning to those alternatives. And in a lot of instances, that's good. As I said before, this is going to cause some short-term pain for the Russian economy, not so much for the Russian people, although the Russian people are going to see a contraction this year of, I don't know, like 3-4% of their economy, something along those lines. So it is, it is a significant recession lasting a year, maybe two, but probably not. The main thing is that a lot of Russian companies are going to be squeezed. On the other hand, a lot of companies from Europe, the United States, the entire Anglosphere are going to be squeezed out of Russia, and they're going to lose plenty out of that. The hurt that these sanctions do, for instance, take Europe, the hurt that these sanctions do are far, far greater on Europe than they are on Russia. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. These banks that have been squeezed in Russia, they're going to have to adapt. This is a part of any war scenario. And make no mistake, Russia is at war. This is a police action in Ukraine. Basically, they're there to protect Russian people, Russian-speaking people, ethnic Russians, and others who are allied with those people. They are also there to denazify Ukraine, which is going to take some time because it's a very complex problem there. I mean, look at Eastern Europe after World War II. It took 5-6 years to really denazify Eastern Europe. It was not something that took place in a few days. The other part of the Russian aims is to demilitarize Ukraine, and that has been a speedy affair. Right now, the Ukraine Air Force does not fly. A good part of it is destroyed. The Ukraine Navy does not sail. A good part of it is destroyed already, and we're in the second week of this rescue campaign. So the demilitarization of the Ukrainian fascist regime has gone at lightning speed. Right now, the Ukrainian government basically has no military. The only military operating in Ukraine are the fascist and Nazi battalions and regiments and that operate autonomously from the Ukrainian military, although in many cases are a part of the Ukrainian military. So the demilitarization's gone by very swiftly. That's the probably the most the big bright light, so to speak, of this rescue mission that Russia is on in Ukraine. The next issue up on our list right now is US settler colonialism will die when we stop believing in it. Rainer Shea.
Now, this pertains to Ukraine because the major mission of the fascist regime has been to carry out a modern Lebensraum, a seizure of land that goes along with the extermination of the indigenous people on that land, so that the supposedly superior nation can fulfill its supposed grand purpose. The regime has been trying to seize the land within the newly independent republics to the far east of Ukraine, and this has mirrored the logic behind U.S. settler colonialism. So it's unsurprising that Washington has been at the center of backing this regime, and it's unsurprising that Nazism itself was directly inspired by U.S. settler colonialism. And you're not going to convince the people with the most stake in these campaigns to give up their genocidal mission, but you're going to be able to defeat their power structures through waging war. And when it comes to the war for the end of settler colonialism, the end of Lebensraum on this continent, we'll see how many white people step up to the task of liberating these occupied territories from the U.S. Lebensraum. But in the end, the odds are in their favor because whether it's in Eurasia or on this continent, U.S. imperialism is on the decline. U.S. capital is contracting. You were just explaining how the situation is so much better for the anti-imperialist bloc than even I was just assuming. So every sign points in the direction of U.S. imperial collapse, which will turn the odds in favor of the liberation.
Yes. It's an interesting question, U.S. settler colonialism. Yeah, we're seeing it applied. The U.S. ruling class obviously applies it everywhere. The working class, which is about 70% of the American public, of the adult public, let's say, the working class is predominantly white. In other words, they're predominantly European. And it's my belief that for a long, long time, they have not been settlers. They have not been settler, at least since the beginning of the 20th century. I don't think that they have been primarily settlers. There are those among them, mostly the middle class. Middle class whites are tremendously settler oriented. But among the working class, most of the working class came from Eastern Europe, from parts of Europe where they were considered the slaves of Europe. and they were treated the same way in the United States. So there are, I think, a large number of white working class people in America who will, when the time comes, join the revolution. And the revolution will decolonize and desettlerize the United States once and for all. Basically, that means colonizing and desettlerizing the middle class in the United States. The middle class here does not act like a normal middle class. The middle class here is much, much, much more beholden to the capitalist ruling class than it is in most parts of the world. In most parts of the world, the middle class is kind of a wavering class that wavers back and forth between alliance with the working class and alliance with the upper class, depending on the circumstances. Whereas in the United States, the middle class is almost totally, and for a long time, been totally wedded to the interests of the capitalist ruling class. So that's where you're going to have a lot of problems. That's what will cause the divide, even though the working class is 70% of the population. A certain number of those people are always right wing. They're always identifying with other than their class interests. In other words, their religious interests or their national interests is what usually pulls them the other direction. So between that small section of the working class and the much, much larger section of the middle class, you're going to have a good solid like 40% of the American people who are opposed to us. That still leaves us with the majority. It still leaves us with a good 60% to carry out the revolution. But it'll be tough going because there will be a large and well-positioned section of the middle class and the middle class oriented minority of the working class on the other side. So anyway, next on the list, US socialists must back existing socialism and support abolishing settler colonialism. Boy, you're really on settler colonialism these days. Go ahead.
And this really speaks to the problem you just identified, which is that such a strength exists for the reactionaries within the core of imperialism. Such a strength, because this is, after all, the center of global exploitation. It's the center of the zone that the colonists have carved out, where they've set up this class of people who receive the benefits of imperialism, even far beyond the capitalist class themselves. America has been called the big house of the global plantation, which is imperialism. And to overcome these contradictions, we must recognize how we need to view contradictions within the existing socialist countries and how we should view contradictions where we are. When it comes to existing socialism, firstly, we need to recognize the socialist countries as socialists. To do that, we must not accept the narratives that the contradictions in places like China, Cuba, North Korea, and so on are so big that they can't legitimately be called socialist. This has been a distortion that Factions like the Maoists, the Trotskyists, the anarchists, and so on have been utilizing from the start, and it's been throwing a wrench in the gear of global proletarian unity. When it comes to our conditions, we need to be honest about ourselves. We need to be honest about the severity of the contradictions within the imperial center, which means we need to acknowledge the prevalence of reactionary thinking. And it's not just bad ideas that are holding the revolution back here. It's the prevalence of imperialist interests, the extent to which there's a labor aristocracy, the extent to which there's a middle class, as you said, that is so deeply, deeply wedded to imperialism.
Yes, absolutely. The belief in the backing of existing socialism. Basically, you're talking about Cuba, Vietnam, China, North Korea. I'm missing missing a few people. Well, like the Belarus. These are existing socialisms that they have all developed under extreme strain, and yet, given that, they have provided a tremendous amount more for their people in the form of living standards, in the form of quality of life, in the form of education and elder care and child care and so forth, that you cannot possibly think that those people are worse off than the people existing in the same level of development who are under capitalism, who live far worse. And especially when you take those existing socialist countries in Eastern Europe and Russia, or Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, I should say, that used to be socialist and now are capitalist, and you look at how they live now, there's just simply no argument that capitalism is better than socialism. Those people, all of those people, live far worse today than they did under existing socialism. So even under the tremendous strain of imperialism that those people suffered, or in the case of like China or Vietnam or Cuba, that they still suffer, they provide enormous benefits to the working class. And most of the working class in those countries appreciates that and enjoys that and fiercely defends that. Where we have a problem is in Western Marxism. Among Western Marxists, a lot of these Western so-called Marxists don't get it. That's where the problem lies. Last but not least tonight, American Jakarta, the settleristic origins of our rising reactionary violence.
When you say that 40% of the U.S. population is wedded to ruling class interests, I immediately think of Jakarta. I think of the method that the Indonesian military regime, after the 1965 CIA coup, used to rally support among the susceptible parts of the population for the extermination of leftists. They went into Muslim communities in particular and exploited existing social divisions using anti-communist atrocity stories to rile up these communities towards hunting down communists or accused communists and killing them en masse. This is what the U.S. ruling class will ultimately try to do if we allow them to, if we haven't already won. They're going to rile up these susceptible parts of the U.S. population, the parts that are susceptible to fascism, and get them on board with a political genocide. This is the position that we're in as communists in the imperial center. We're in the heart of the beast, and that comes with alarming implications, but they're only alarming insofar as we will not be prepared to defend ourselves from that violence. I am every day studying the methods that communists have historically used to defend themselves from reactionary violence. I am reading Che's Guerrilla Warfare, and I am trying to lead by example so that we can minimize the harm that's coming to the greatest extent that we can.
Yes, this is a frightening future to consider. And hopefully people will come to the revolution before that happens so that we can avoid it. If we don't do that, if we can't avoid it, we're going to have to go through it. And going through it is going to cause the most destruction that the American continent, the North American continent, has ever seen. It is going to engulf all of the North American continent, Mexico, the United States, and Canada, with terrible, terrible suffering and terrible, terrible, terrible violence, terrible, terrible, terrible death and mutilation. So that's something we really, really want to avoid. How we avoid it, I'm not quite sure, other than socialist revolution is the only solution. Barring that, we're going to have to arm up on the quick. We're going to have to set ourselves against the other side and hope that our numbers and our strength of will prevail. So, okay, well, that's it for tonight. Good job, Rainer. You had a lot of stuff up here, and you did a great job in presenting it all. I want to thank the viewers and listeners for tuning in, and hopefully you will be back with us next week when we'll have another episode of Revolutionary Socialist Review. Until then, I bid you a sweet adieu.